It is Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Joining me today is former House Majority Leader Jerry Keene. A longtime resident of both Metro Atlanta and the Golden Isles, Mr. Keene is currently President and CEO of Joe Tanner and Associates, a full-service government affairs and consulting firm located in Atlanta, Georgia. Prior to assuming that position, Mr. Keene was Senior Consultant of Strategic Development at Troutman Sanders Strategies. He has served as President of the Georgia Christian Coalition for a number of years before being elected to the Georgia House of Representatives in 2000. He made history 4 years later when he became the first Republican House Majority Leader in the state's history, a position he held until his retirement from public office in 2010. He's graciously made the trip all the way over from Atlanta, fighting the traffic the whole way, I am sure, here to the Russell Library, and we're honored to have you here, sir. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
I wonder if we could just begin by telling us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing.
Yeah. Had a wonderful, grew up here in Metro Atlanta when Atlanta was really a small town. Very middle-class family, mom and dad. My dad was a contracts attorney with Lockheed. Mom, stay-at-home mom, of course, at that time. And there were three brothers. I was the middle one. All of us very active in sports. And grew up here in the metro area. Went to school here at Shamley High School, and I think very typical for that time of, in our country, a very typical happy days sort of middle class upbringing. I can remember to this day. I tell people on Saturdays, a parent would take us, and we'd be 10, 11, 12, 13, take us over to Oglethorpe, put us on the bus or the trolley. We'd ride downtown to the Fox Theater, get off, go next. There was a Crystal next door. Mm-hmm. Eat Crystals, go to the Saturday matinee, and come back out by ourselves at that age. So it was a different Atlanta and a different time, but a very, very happy childhood, very happy family, and still a close family.
So your dad, you said, worked at Lockheed.
Yeah.
Was he like so many other Georgians of that time period? Did he move into Georgia, or was he
He was born and raised in Mississippi.
Okay.
And ended up in Georgia through the service. He ended up at Fort McPherson during the war in a administrative job, and ended up staying over here and going to law school, and then just stayed here, got a job with Lockheed, and met my mom, who was from Powder Springs, Georgia,
right,
and settled here.
So your father's working at Lockheed, a politically important, economically important business. Did you grow up in a politically engaged family, or?
No, I wouldn't say they were not political. My dad was as conservative as you can be. I remember he was a huge Goldwater fan, so I was influenced. I'll tell you where I got hooked on politics as a very young, you would still consider a child. I remember that when Khrushchev came and made his now famous speech at the UN and banging his shoe. And we were doing drills in school to get under the desk. And it was frightening for a young, a young boy at that time to see what was going on in the world. And it sounds silly now, but it was sort of where it got my eye in politics, because as a young boy, my dad came home and we were talking about it, and I said, Dad, I think if I could get in a room with that guy, I could change his mind. And my dad said, son, you should go into politics. So I was always interested. I was very fortunate in high school to have a civics and government, American history and government teacher. She was also a counselor, Mrs. Timmy, who had a great influence on me she saw I had an interest in politics and taught me how to debate, gave me a real love for American history in particular, and Georgia history and civics, as we called it back then.
Right.
And so that's where it really began. And then as you get a little older and you start paying taxes, and the world changed so quickly, I personally believe the 60s were one of the most dynamic times in recent history. It had a huge change. Today's liberal or left-wing movement actually was born out of the anti-war movement of the 60s. Many other movements came out of that anti-war movement in terms of what it did on campuses. And so
revolutions.
you became politically active during that time, whether you wanted to or not, because there was a pretty wide divide.
What did you major in college?
Back then it was called business administration.
Okay.
But had a love for economics.
The BBA.
I wasn't a political science major. I still like money more than politics. And what I found out when I got into politics, you can't do one or the other.
You can. It usually doesn't end.
No. I've got the tax returns to prove it doesn't work out. But yeah, I still had an interest. Absolutely loved in '76. Loved Ronald Reagan when he ran against Gerald Ford. I was a volunteer for Reagan and was just brokenhearted when he didn't get the nomination. And as a result, I voted for the only Democrat for president I've ever voted for, Jimmy Carter. And I did that in 19. Now I've had full confession and asked for forgiveness, but I was so upset that Ronald Reagan didn't get the nomination that I went ahead and I voted for Carter in '76. But I rectified that in '80 by not only volunteering but voting for Ronald Reagan.
So right after college, you go into business for yourself, or
no. Right out of school, I was working with Gold Kiss.
Okay.
In their commodity trading division, sort of for lack of a better term, it'd be accounting. We balanced the positions. Gold Kiss would trade in the commodity futures market, against positions they would take in terms of cotton and wheat and the other things they did. So corn. And so at the end of the day, after all the trades were settled, in a now looking back, a very antiquated old key punch card, we had a young lady that would do that, and we would put what we call our position report out every day for the next morning.
Oh my goodness.
And then just wanted to get into business, and a friend of a friend of a friend introduced me, got me in the insurance business, and after a short time working for them, I went out on my own and worked for myself until I went to work for Troutman Sanders after I retired from the General Assembly.
So you mentioned that you volunteered, worked for the Reagan campaign in 1980. How did you get? You sound like you're a lifelong Republican.
Yeah.
Unlike many here in Georgia, even those who end up in the Republican Party. What was your first interaction with Republican politics here in Georgia, either at a local level or a county or something like that?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to go back because I don't remember a state party. There was.
Sure.
But I don't remember being that involved in the state party until the late 80s. And early on, literally, the Reagan campaign had a local, and I just called up. And back then, it was putting out yard signs, putting door hangers in your area. That was it. And you didn't have the sophistication and certainly the technology you have today. Back then it was basically shoe leather, as much door to door, and was a huge Reagan fan, which I guess ultimately attracted me to Steve Forbes when I worked with him. But and then of course in the late 80s you had the real rise of the social conservative movement. Come to part. Pat Robertson ran for president in '88, and that attracted social conservatives. I think, as you know, Ashton, at that time, the Republican Party still had, it was a hodgepodge of the Rockefeller, Republicans, Dirksen out of Illinois, that were, for that, fairly moderate, socially moderate party, but somewhat fiscally conservative. The Democratic Party at that time had, in the South, a very hardcore conservative, probably far more conservative than the Republican base overall. And so all of a sudden that tension, which ultimately affected the Georgia capital, was beginning to pressure, and there was a movement within the Republican Party because Reagan had come in and really put away the old yellow dog Democrat in the South. He carried the South and really put all those people who had been in the conservative Democratic camp over into the Republican camp. And then all of a sudden, these blue blood Republicans were looking around and saying, who are these guys? And that created that tension of who are we going to be as a party and what are we going to stand for? And that's when I sort of got involved in the party.
Okay. Well, you're living and working in probably the most Republican part of Georgia at that time, Metro Atlanta,
Right.
Cobb County.
Sure.
Sort
yeah.
of the epicenter of Republicans. Why do you think it grew up there, whereas the Republican voting strength resided there, as opposed to, as you mentioned, those far more conservative places in Middle Georgia, South Georgia, out in the country?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people try to explain that and go back of how the South became a Democrat. I mean, it goes back, I guess, to Reconstruction, where the Republicans were responsible. We're on the other side of the locals, but if you'll think back, North DeKalb County
Yeah.
was the epicenter of Republican politics,
Yes.
and then that bled into, as the suburbs began to move out, it became Cobb County.
Right.
But North DeKalb, you can
Brookhaven,
think of
Chamblee.
Ben Blackburn, Congressman Blackburn came out of there. Pat Swindle.
Harry Geisinger.
Harry Geisinger, God love him. And so that was where the Republican base really was in Georgia. In fact, it wasn't the base; it's about where all of them lived and worked was in one area, as evidenced by their election results. But and that's where I grew up. My dad located us there in Dunwoody before Dunwoody was cool, and it was just a small little crossroads. And 285 ended at Roswell Road. There were dirt piles there.
Oh, wow.
And my dad had to drive out to Lockheed every day.
That would have been a drive.
When they opened 285 to there, he said, "Man, this is awesome." And I never will forget that they had paved on beyond there, but they hadn't opened. So a lot of guys would go up the dirt pile there at Roswell Road and then back down. It wasn't open and drive out there. And, but I think that had as much impact because you live there. I'd been brought up in a Republican. My dad was a solid Republican. And then that was sort of your neighbors and all. That was a heavy Republican base.
So you mentioned the Christian Coalition, Pat Robertson. Were you involved in the Robertson campaign in '88?
None at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I don't say just the opposite, but not at all. Yeah, I tell people the very first Christian Coalition meeting I ever attended, I was announced as the state chairman. It was an interesting turn of events. I had moved to the coast of Georgia, been active in conservative politics, been active in the party at that time.
Sure.
Certainly on the conservative wing with people like Carolyn Meadows and people like that. And knew Ralph Reed, and certainly knew Pat, but was not active. Didn't oppose Christian Coalition or anything, but
Now, are we talking Pat Robertson?
Pat
or
Garland. Sorry, Pat Garland,
Okay.
who was the state chairman at the time, knew him.
Right.
And had gone to a few events they had and all. And then, of course, he leaves to go to work for the Phil Graham for president, Senator Graham for president. So I'm literally in my office in St. Simons one day and the phone rings, and it's Ralph Reed. And he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Good, Ralph, what's up?" He said, "I want you to come up to D.C., meet with Pat and I. We want to talk to you about taking over our organization, Georgia State Chairman." Well, I started laughing, and he goes, "No, we're serious." He said, "Gartland's leaving to go do this thing, and we need somebody with a little different perspective, to grow it. And we've got a big Senate race coming up. We had a lot of stuff. We had a race in '94, a governor's race.
Right. Very close race.
And then, but we had a Senate race too. It was Cleland. I think it was Cleland and Milner at that time.
In '96.
In '96. So '94, I'm trying to remember who.
No, '92 would have been Coverdell and White Fowler.
Right. Coverdell had already won.
Right.
It was '94. This was in '93. So we have a lot of elections coming up here at the end of '93. He said, "What do you think?" And I said, "No." He said, "At least fly up, have lunch with us, fly back." So I went up, went back home and thought about it, and I had lunch the next day with a great friend of mine who's now passed in St. Simons. And he goes, "Keen, don't you turn down this opportunity. You love politics, you've been involved, you got the opportunity in a conservative state to head up an organization. You can have some impact, have some influence, do it. Literally, that's what I did. And as I said, I knew some people, but I didn't know who was on the board. I had to go meet the executive director and the office staff. It was out of the blue. Most of the people didn't know me. And so I began, we had to rebuild a little bit. We had some financial issues, so sort of broaden the fundraising base and actively went out and broadened the membership base from traditionally what it had been. And
how do you mean? What had it been, and where were you trying to reach out to? What groups,
I wanted to expand into areas of the faith-based community. I started out actually approaching the African American church base because they were very conservative on social issues. We had some disagreements on probably some fiscal issues, but on the life issue, for example, and others, they're solidly pro-life at that time. So I reached out and met and had very limited success. Was not successful, but was able to get some support, built some coalitions, attracted some people in that had not been in there, and it was a fun couple 2.5 years. I originally told Ralph and Pat I'd do it for just an election and then stayed over, but during that time in '96, Forbes came to Atlanta. He got in the presidential race late, if you remember. And as Christian Coalition chairman, most of the candidates would call and want a meeting. And you would go and meet with all the candidates that were running. I mean, I remember meeting with Lamar and Alexander and all of them come through. So always a big fan of Forbes, in the Forbes magazine. So I was like, yeah, let's go do it. And my ED at the time goes, well, he's never going to be with us. And I said, well, that may be true, but I want to go meet him. So we went downtown and we just hit it off. We had a great meeting. He goes on, of course, didn't get the nomination. Dole got it, and put Kemp on there. And we walked out of the convention in San Diego. We had a great time. We all knew we were going to get killed, and we did. And so it's now '97, President's Day. Rusty Paul's chairman of the state party. And he had invited Forbes to speak and put me at the table with Forbes, and we had a great conversation. And afterwards, his soon-to-be chief of staff, the guy that was with him, said, you got a few minutes afterwards to meet with us. And Steve was forming Americans for Hope, Growth, and Opportunity prior to 2000. Their first policy initiative was to get the car tag tax in Virginia eliminated. Think about what happened in Georgia while I was there. Sort of planted a seed, and some other
birthday
things.
tax.
Yeah. So that's where the term came from.
Okay, well there you go. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
All
So I got on board with Forbes with 4 or 5 other people, and then that led into the campaign and all that. But all that ties how I got in the Christian Coalition. I made a lot of great friends. It was a great time. It was a great learning experience for me politically to see the tensions and passions of people on the issues. I was able to work with Senator Coverdell. It was a very stressful time in '96 with Dole's comment about taking the pro-life platform plank out. And Senator Coverdell was appointed chairman of the platform committee. So I worked with him closely to sort of bring the social conservative wing and what I would call the more establishment wing of the party here in Georgia back. And I think we did. And we had a successful convention in '96, not a successful election, but based on where it had been prior to that since '88, I think we did a good job of sort of bringing everybody back together.
Well, why do you think? Because you're absolutely right. With '88, there was significant tension every 2 years, plus the state party conventions. There was usually a socially conservative candidate versus, as you say, an establishment party candidate. How were you and others within the Republican Party able to bridge those divides and sort of mesh into, and I think you agree or disagree, mesh into one sort of a cohesive organization under the Republican banner.
While the Republican Party nationally had grown to be very successful, Reagan 80 and 84 and H.W. Bush 88, Newt and the takeover of the House in 92. In the state of Georgia, we were still way down the line. We had very few elected Republicans. And in fact, we only had one statewide elected constitutional officer, at 2000. That was Linda Shrinko. It was still hard. The courthouses, the sheriffs, local elections were still controlled by Democrats, even where there were Republican congressmen. Give you a great example, the 1st District down on the coast of Georgia, Jack Kingston.
Yep.
Did a great job down there, was very popular, but virtually every elected official in his district, with the exception of Glenn County and Louisville and Chatham, were all Democrats.
Right.
Conservatives, but were all Democrats. So we had not really enjoyed at the state level any unified success. Now, there are tons of reasons for that, but one of them was this inability for people who, as Ronald Reagan said, an 80% friend is not a 20% enemy, right? And we had to find things we agreed on and then agree to disagree on the things we don't. And I think that happened. But we wanted to control state government. And you were not going to do that fracturing the vote. It's hard enough with an incumbency of 130 years controlling every facet of state government, from the budget to appointments to everything. When you're fractured, you simply don't have a chance.
Gotcha. So what was your, we sort of talked with your interaction with the Republican Party state organization within the Christian Coalition, but that wasn't the only Christian right or socially conservative organization in the state. Was Georgia RighttoLife? Was that what sort of interaction or collaboration, coordination, if any, was there within sort of that we'll call it the umbrella of the social conservative movement? Yeah,
I got along extremely well with Georgia RighttoLife at that time. We worked well together. We didn't always agree. And I used to tell them, I'm chairman of the Christian Coalition. Life, while is a huge issue,
right?
We're also very much concerned about fiscal policy, because I believe poor fiscal policy leads to poor social policy. And I really tried to take the organization and not just make it a quote unquote life issue, but we moved on, tax issues, revenue issues, these type of things, voting issues. So that's what I said about broadening the focus. When you do that, you also broaden the people who are interested. Everybody said, well, one-issue voter. Look, let's be honest. Most voters are one-issue voters. Now, they have a different issue.
Right.
Left, right, center. But generally, most voters have one issue that's sort of that's their deal. Okay, whether it's health care, taxes, the life issue, whatever. What I did was try to broaden that base, and so that's how the party, and when in '96 we sort of worked to put it together, I think at that time the coalition, Ralph Reed on a national basis was heavily involved with both the Dole campaign and then ultimately with the Bush campaign in 2000. But we all worked together to say we need to win. You can't govern if you don't win. And you can't make changes on that one issue if you don't win. And so the focus was, let's win. Let's get behind candidates that are electable statewide, and then we'll see some things turn around. Paul Coverdale was the first great example of that.
1992. And we've spoken briefly about 94, 96, 98 when Guy Milner was such an outsized presence in Republican politics. Almost successful in 1994.
Very close.
A whisker. three unsuccessful elections. But what did Guy Milner's candidacy, his three races, what did that mean for the Republican Party, or what did it do for Republican Party politics in Georgia?
Well, Guy, by being able to self-fund to a certain degree, helped us. When you're in the minority, you can't raise money. And when I mean in the minority, I mean like we were in the minority. It was very difficult to raise money. I think I told you, even as a minority Republican caucus in the House, I think the most money we ever raised as a caucus was like $12,000, and we thought we'd hit the lotto. So all of a sudden, Guy comes in. He's got a big presence. He's a successful business guy.
Right.
He was tied into the Atlanta business community. He had been a donor and a supporter of Republican causes. And he's able to assemble a big team and fund it, and all of a sudden we could be competitive.
Right.
When we didn't have the resources, we had foot soldiers, but the big money, the big business community in Georgia was still going to contribute to the Democrats, and really did so to Sonny beat them.
Right.
And so Guy gave us the opportunity, and even though Guy didn't win, he sort of built a statewide ability to compete statewide. He brought in people, he brought in credibility, he brought in resources, and a lot of people who are still active in politics today in this state. And Guy probably doesn't get a lot of credit for that. A lot of people criticize him for running 3 times. I won't do that, but I will say he gave us the first opportunity to compete statewide, and that's sort of how we got to that point.
Well, speaking of '98, I read in the clippings files that you had considered running for governor.
It's very true. Yes,
in 1998, and of course '98 would have been Mike Bowers would have been sort of the giant in that race, and then Guy Milner gets in, obviously. What made you think going from Christian Coalition to maybe jumping into the Republican governor's race?
I had a few people call me. People always say that, you know. In my case, it was a very few. You say, "Oh, I had all these people." No, I didn't.
It's quality, not quantity.
Yeah. But I had a couple of people call and say, "Look, Guy's probably going to jump in." You know, Bowers, as you know, sort of pulled out of the race for reasons, and then we don't think Guy can win. You've built a pretty good name ID around the state in the last couple of years. People even in the establishment wing like you and respect you. They don't see you as a radical or flamethrower. Why don't you think about it? It never crossed my mind. So I said, okay, I'll think about it. Well, it just, you know how things go. As soon as you say that, then you're out there. Mm-hmm. So Guy calls me, and we were friends, and I'd helped him. And so I go over to his house, and it is hot. It's a day almost like today. And we sit out by the swimming pool in the sun. And I think he did this on purpose, you know. I've got a tie and a coat on, and he's got a tennis outfit on.
Oh, I've seen the pool, yeah.
Yeah. So we're sitting down there, and he goes, "Jerry, you want it? You know, get behind me." And I think it was like, you know, the old movies with the spotlight on the guy in the interrogation room. That's sort of what it was. But, you know, when you think about things and you go through it logically, it was obvious I could not assemble the resources or the team to run. It was quite obvious. I'd already, you know, been helping Forbes. I just started helping him on a few things, and was really excited about what Steve brought to the National Party debate in terms of the flat tax and reforming taxes, which is like my issue. And I just saw that as a greater opportunity and a greater path for their skills than getting in a race and running head-to-head with a guy that already had name ID, already had an organization, and candidly, there was no way I would have the resources to go head-to-head. So I didn't.
So that from there, you sort of you get on board with Forbes campaign.
Yes.
You know, in a full-time position. What was your position on the 2000?
I was National
campaign.
Coalitions Director.
Okay.
I went, as I said, I was precursor to the campaign. We had the Americans for Hope, Growth, and Opportunity,
right,
which was a policy advocacy. Worked on the car tag tax in Virginia and some things statewide. But Steve knew that if he ran again in 2000 in Iowa and New Hampshire, he was going to have a stronger conservative base in the primary.
Sure.
He had none. So candidly, my role was to go in the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Louisiana, South Carolina, and begin to build a social conservative base for Steve. And we did that, and we did that very successfully. I got Steve to speak to Road to Victory, the big national Christian coalition meeting. It came to Atlanta one year. You may not remember that. It was in D.C., and then the Hilton was under renovation. They came to Atlanta for 1 year, and Steve spoke, and at the convention he made the following line: life begins at conception and ends at natural death. And he got a standing ovation. And we took that and built from that. I went into Iowa and was able to recruit the executive director and chairman of the Iowa Christian Coalition to come on board. Same in New Hampshire. Got some people involved in Louisiana, not in South Carolina. The Bush team had them.
I was going to say, you were. That's a tough row to hoe when Ralph Reed is in the George W. Bush campaign.
Right.
So that would have been you had to have been running.
Working
against many folks that you had known and worked with for half a decade or so.
It wasn't as much running against the Bush camp, which was the establishment and had all the elected endorsements, and we had
talk about the resources.
But I believe in this guy. I had not found a candidate like him since Reagan, and still do. I saw him recently at an event here in town. He as you know, he came in for Casey Cable a week ago. I went and saw him. And I told him, I said, if you ever decide to run for dog catcher or Bedminster, New Jersey, you call me. I'm up there. I'm on the team. And we laughed. To this day, I learned so much from him and that campaign. That guy is the real deal. And he would be with 5 people in Iowa or 100 or 200 people, and his message was always the same. It never wavered. And brilliant thought leader. And I just believed in the guy and still do. We came in a very close second to Bush in Iowa.
Which is saying
very
something in
close.
Iowa.
Well, the Des Moines Register the next morning said, Bush wins a straw poll. Elizabeth Dole comes in third. We came in second, and it was close. And remember, I forgot how many candidates. I go back between Buchanan and Elizabeth Dole, Lamar Alexander, Orrin Hatch jumped in late, Alan Keyes.
That's right, Orrin Hatch.
They were all in there. They were all in there. And we came out of nowhere and finished second. But it was just hard to overcome.
Sure.
The Bush establishment was strong. Had the governors and elected officials and party apparatus in all the states, but wouldn't change anything. It was a great experience and got an up close view of a presidential campaign at the grassroots level, and that's why it wasn't that I was opposed to Bush. I really believed in this guy. I believed in his message. I got to know him as a person and his family, and I said, this is the type guy. If we could pick him up and put him in the Oval Office, he'd be a tremendous president. Well,
I'll be candid and I'll tell you my introduction to Steve Forbes was Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, T. Forbes.
he was the skit. He was sitting on it. They were roofers and they were sitting on a roof. And Steve Forbes was saying if he had $1 million, he would buy a tricked out sports car, and he wouldn't even care how fast he goes. If he blew up the tranny, he could just buy a new tranny. that was my introduction to Steve Forbes back then.
Well, I'll tell you the dumbest thing I ever did for him. During the campaign, the Comedy Channel had come into its own. And they had this young field reporter named Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
If you remember his early.
Oh, yeah. So
I got a call, and it ended up on me about doing an interview with Steve. It was not my best decision, but I'm thinking,
exposure.
we're trying to get people to believe he's not this, stoic Northeastern guy.
Saturday
he's
Night
not.
Live came out of that.
He's got a great sense of humor. He's very warm. Well, that'd be great. Oh, it was a total disaster. So I don't think Steve spoke to me for about 24 hours, but that was my first introduction to Steve Colbert.
Well, you mentioned that you go from the Forbes campaign to the Statehouse campaign pretty quick, because qualifying would have been March, April.
Mm-hmm.
April. So
we pulled out the end of February.
Okay. So how did you put that together? Because a lot of folks they plan these things out a little bit further in advance.
Wasn't on my radar. Stephen Scarlett, who had the House seat in Georgia, or in Glenn County, a Republican seat, had found out that Judge Taylor was going to not run for re-election, Superior Court judge down there. And as you know, most judges retire so the governor can appoint someone.
Right. Here in Athens.
Well, Glenn Taylor, who's now deceased, was a strong Republican, and he didn't want Roy Barnes to appoint a successor. So he waited to the last possible minute and then said, I'm not going to run again. And Stephen had let me know he's going to run for the judgeship. And he goes, you need to run for it. You need to come home and run for the House. Man, I'm tired. I've been doing this for a couple of years. I've been gone. I just get my life back and eat some fried shrimp and, Well, Chuck Clay was party chairman. Chuck called me. And, you got to do it. My good friend Tom Price, who we had met each other years before in the party, before either one of us ever run, and I'm the one that sort of talked him into running for, well, not me, but encouraged him along with others running for the Sally Newbill seat. And so they all called me and said, you got to do it. And again, my old friend in St. Simon's that taught me in the Christian Coalition said, oh man, you got to do this. So I made a few calls. It was an open primary with 3 candidates, and we won about 60%. And
it's pretty good in a 3-way.
Yeah, it's pretty. But I remember I'd come off a presidential campaign, so I brought a lot of the stuff with me.
Okay.
My pollster was John McLaughlin, and and he operated as my GC, and I used a lot of our same mail vendors, and I'd come off that campaign and just sort of never stopped and just put it into mine. But I kind of thank the people of Glenn County enough. It was an honor for 10 years, and I'd originally said I'd serve 8, and that would be it. But due to a lot of things, I ended up staying 1 extra term that felt like it was the right thing to do. But it was just a great honor, and I was there at the right time, and all the things that happened leading up to 2004, and there were several. I was just in a great position to be there.
So you're elected in 2000. Mm-hmm. You go up to Atlanta. Do you expect? Well, we'll talk about the majority status in a second. What was your first impression of the Gold Dome, of Speaker Murphy up there?
Well, remember, I've been up there with the Christian Coalition.
Sure, so you've been around.
A lot of the players. I knew Speaker Murphy. Most of the Democratic leadership, Larry Walker and people like that. I knew a lot of the Republicans in both the House and the Senate. And I think, coming up there, I had a little bit of an advantage in that I had some relationships and certainly had at least a working knowledge. But you never until you're inside there. And it's the same old story. You get up there and you get sworn in, you sit down on the floor of the House, and you look around and you go, man, how did I get here? And about a year later, you look around and said, how did these people get here? But it was, I am forever grateful that I served under Tom Murphy. I know that sounds weird coming from a Republican. But like him or hate him, and a lot of Republicans hated him, and there were days, count me in there. But he was a brilliant strategist. He did a lot of good things for this state. And he held together a coalition that couldn't be held once he was gone. And I was very active in helping Bill Heath when he ran against him and won.
Right.
But he's a legend in Georgia politics, longest serving state speaker in the history of the country. And I'm glad I had an opportunity to serve under him. Larry Walker's majority leader was and is a great friend, and when I became majority leader, that I was going to do that job, he was the first person I called and met with him and talked with, how do I do this? Where, show me where the traps are going to be, and he defined it pretty good. But it was tough. I mean, in those days, you didn't chair any committees.
Right.
You couldn't pass a bill. Remember, the Speaker of their House in Georgia tells you where your car parking place is, where your office and your secretary is, what committees you are on, where your seat on the floor of the House is. It's not like in D.C. where the minority leadership gets so many slots and they place you on committees and all that. Totally different. One day when I was minority whip, I'm sitting down there next to Majority Leader Lynn Westmoreland at the time, and we had a back left corner back there of some rowdies in our caucus that liked to cause Speaker Murphy and headaches. Speaker Murphy looks down at Westmoreland. Get up here. So Westmoreland goes up and sits down next to him on the podium, and they talk while he comes back down. As Lynn always did, could diffuse things and get people smiling and laughing. I said, what was that all about? And he said, you got to do something with these guys back here in the back, man. And Lynn goes, well, Mr. Speaker, what do you want me to do? You tell them where to park, sit, what committees, where their office on. All I can do is take away their donut at caucus meeting. He said, Speaker Murphy, just go back down there and sit down. So you learn in minority, we didn't pass bills. In fact, Speaker Murphy at times wouldn't even recognize you to ask a question. You could raise your head, punch your button, and he just wasn't going to recognize you. And I think it helped me appreciate the majority, helped me appreciate the folks that were in the minority. And I think institutionally we've lost a lot of that because there are very few people left in the Republican caucus and either the House or the Senate that served in the minority.
So when you came in, would Bob Irvin still have been the minority leader?
My first caucus meeting was Westmoreland versus Irvin.
Really?
First caucus meeting I ever went to. We had our caucus elections the week after the general election, and I voted for Lynn Westmoreland. And
I guess that answers that question.
Well, he was a friend. I got to know him when I was at the coalition.
Sure.
I knew Lynn. He just became a friend, and when I announced I was running, he was one of the first people that called me and said, "Man, I'm glad to hear you're running." I'm not so sure Irvin and some of the guys in the caucus were so happy I was running. They didn't know, what's this guy up to? What's he going to do? And Lynn was very supportive and encouraged me. And then my second term, I actually ran for whip.
Right.
And then was able to sit next to Lynn until he ran for Congress.
So your second term would have been 2002, but in between there was redistricting, 2001 redistricting. You would have been a freshman, so a freshman in the minority, so you probably wouldn't have had much of a hand in the process.
Well, I had none. Had absolutely none. My district.
Yeah, I was going to say probably best just talk about how your district changed.
It was used
between
in the federal
2000 and 2002.
They drew, as you know, the Democrats packed Republicans. That's what lost them. Into as many districts as they could to dilute voting strength. So my district still had St. Simon's, part of North Glenn County. Then it went out into the ocean, or in this case, the marsh or the river, bypassed McIntosh County in total, came back onto land at Richmond Hill. And I represented some precincts east of 95 in Richmond Hill that were heavily Republican. And they wanted to get them out to protect that seat up there. They didn't want to mess with the McIntosh and Eugene Tillman seat, who had McIntosh and parts of Glenn. So I never will forget when Chairman Tommy Smith was presenting the map, I raised my hand. I said, Chairman, can you show me on that map the road I will take from St. Simon's Island to Richmond Hill that I can go to the people in the northern part of the district if I get reelected without driving through another district, or in this case, two districts, or getting my boat out and taking the waterways. And the map was a disaster. As you knew, they used a combination of multi-member districts.
Right, the multi-member district.
Our strategy was we thought they were going to increase the number of districts. Constitution says there should be no less than 180.
Right.
Lynn and I kept playing. He said, I think what they're going to do is they may draw 185, 190 to protect their majority because they can go in and draw some Democratic districts. What they did instead was draw Republicans together where they could. The most egregious gerrymandering map I think anyone's ever seen. And then they packed us at 5% deviation over what a House district should be. They took Democrats and reduced them by minus 5%, and that's what cost them the map. It wasn't the multi-member districts. When we filed a lawsuit, all $13,000 we raised. When we filed the lawsuit, we ultimately won on the one man, one vote rule. Mm-hmm. That if you lived in a Republican district, you were actually diluted by 10%. Your vote was worth 10% less than somebody in a neighboring Democratic. I watched the hearings down at the federal courthouse almost every day, and you could tell by that three-judge panel and their questions. They were not amused. But a little to bring the circle back, the state party chairman was Ralph Reed.
Yep, that's right.
And we had to convince Ralph to fund this lawsuit because all we could raise in the House was $13,000.
That's not going to cut it.
Not going to do it when you're going to the Supreme Court. And to Ralph's credit and to Alec Pointevant's credit, National Committee man, treasurer of the party at that time, they took a chance with us and helped fund that lawsuit, which cost several $100,000. Without that, I think ultimately we would have taken a majority. It would have been slower coming.
Right.
But once, and I'll never will forget, we were sitting on the floor of the House in a late afternoon, early evening session when the decision came out, then we couldn't pass a map, and that's a whole nother story. We tried to build a coalition, and the rural Democrats wanted to pass a map with us, and Speaker Coleman would not let them do it. So the special master was appointed by the three-judge panel and drew a map. And we're sitting on the floor of the House, and our Blackberries go off. At this time, it was Glenn Richardson was minority leader and it was the governor. Governor's produced saying the maps are down here. Y'all need to come down. And we looked at those maps, and we knew we had a chance. After we went through all the numbers, we knew we had 88 seats locked up. And Glenn and I traveled the state of Georgia. I literally wore out a car, meeting with anybody that would listen to us. Not only recruiting candidates, but with business leaders all the states saying, we're going to get 88. And if we can just win here, we think we can get to 91. Our biggest fear, Ashton, was we would get 88, 89, or 90, or maybe 91. And we knew the Democrats would try to pick off 1, 2, or 3 of our people, which they could have. They had a lot more tools in the toolbox than we had, even though we had the governor.
To persuade them to either switch or vote.
Or vote with Democrats for the speaker and leadership. So we tried to cut a deal. Now, go back 2 years to 2002.
Okay.
Sonny Perdue gets elected as first Republican governor. Between that election in November and coming in January, we tried to build a coalition in the House, Lynn Westmoreland and I and others, working with Sonny, Nick Ayers, to get some Democrats to vote with us to make Lynn Speaker and sort of flip the House, if you will. They wouldn't convert, but they would vote on Larry Walker Speaker, and then Lynn was going to be chairman of rules.
Okay.
So we cut out a deal with Larry Walker that Larry would run as Speaker. All the Republicans would vote for him, and if Larry could get enough Democrats, and we still were a long way from 91. Then Larry would be the speaker, but he would make Lynn chairman of rules. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's closest. I mean, we've never even daydreamed. And that coalition fell apart on the Sunday before we were the second Monday in January. Literally fell apart.
And that's how Terry Coleman ends up
we couldn't hold the coalition.
Okay.
Now, fast forward 2 years. That night in November, we win the House. And we win, 94 seats, I think it was, something like that. And all of a sudden, our phones were ringing that night from 2 or 3 Democrats who switched almost immediately. Henson Mosley, Chuck Sims, Penny Houston. So we got our numbers up pretty quick to 96, 97. It's been a long time, I'd have to go back and look, but we were comfortable. Now, before the election in November of 04 when we won, our fear was we knew we had 88. We needed some insurance. Mm-hmm. So I went and met with a Democratic House caucus member who was somewhat involved in the Larry Walker thing, but ultimately pulled out, and said, if you can put 4, 5, 6 Democrats together, even if we win, and this is important, even if we win 91, 92 seats, you will be chairman of appropriations, and you will be at the table with us, and the people you bring with us will get some type of chairmanship. Now, it may not be, appropriation, ways and means, but they were not anything prominent. So that person went together and put together 5 people. And we had a deal, win, lose, or draw. On the Sunday before the Tuesday of the election, I'm packing my stuff in St. Simons to drive to Atlanta for the elections. And sort of on Monday, we were set up the war room and everything. My phone rings, and it was this Democratic House member who said, the deal's off. I said, what do you mean? I can't do it. Terry and them, they got to them all. I can't do it. I said, think about it. I don't need to think about it. I said, well, you've got till tomorrow, once the elections start. Monday, talk with them again, deal's off. That's how close we came to making a very bad deal, but we were trying to build some insurance. As it turned out, we didn't need them.
Right.
A couple of people in that 5 ended up switching. And then later, many of the old rural Democrats came over and switched and were a great part of our caucus and great friends. And we needed them. We needed their institutional knowledge. Sure. We needed their ability to help legislation get through, and I was grateful to them for taking that step. But
when did it dawn on you? You said you went back to Atlanta for the election. When did it dawn on you that the Republicans were actually going to be in the majority?
Election night when we were looking at Jim Cole's race against Curtis Jenkins. We were, there were certain races that we were looking at.
Sort of bellwethers.
Could we beat, the 88 got us there with not beating one Democratic incumbent. So, where could we win? Where could we beat? Where could we do this? And once those numbers started coming in and this race fell and this race fell, Roger Lane, who's now a judge, was running in a newly drawn seat by the judges that had part of Glenn County and McIntosh, but it went up into part of Long and Wayne County. Had most of the old Tillman seat, but had enough R's. We wasn't sure. The seat had never been held by a Republican, ever. Cicely Hill in Camden County was running Charlie Smith's. Never been open seat held by a Republican. So all of a sudden, some of these newly drawn seats start coming in. Ed Reinders over in Southwest Georgia, and all of a sudden these numbers start coming in these races. And Roger called me because we're looking on the computer and we couldn't get any numbers down there. So I called Roger. He goes, man, we got it. I said, are you sure? He said, I've got people at the courthouses. And Wayne, Long, Glenn, and McIntosh, it's over. We got it. It's not even that close. I said, are you, I asked him about it. He used to tell me, he said, Jerry, I've got the numbers. That's when I knew. because that
When
put
the
us
man on the ground
that
is-
put us at 92, regardless of what help
Right.
in these other seats, and we were ahead in a couple, like Jim Cole's seat. And so at that point, Glenn and I went to Governor Perdue's suite. We were at the hotel, and the next morning at 8:30, we had breakfast at the mansion. It was Glenn and Mark Burkhalter, myself, Jay Walker went over, and who was going to be chief of staff and who had ran our campaigns, and met with the governor and his team and began putting together a House government to. But all we had to do, Ashton, in about 60 days was reassign every committee, reassign every office space.
I was wondering where you were going with this.
Reassign every chairmanship. And that's where the Committee on Assignments was formed. I don't think before then there was ever a Committee on Assignments, particularly in the House. If there were, I'm not aware of it. And we allowed House members to apply. Literally, you filled out an application. You want to be chairman of this, you want to be chairman of this, applied, and we interviewed everybody for those jobs. We had people that were elected for the first time applying for, chairman of appropriations because they were good with numbers. But we went through a process with the members on the Committee of Assignment, which became the caucus leaders and then some members appointed by the Speaker, and began assembling our chairs and then our committees. We did not finish the assignment of chairmanships and committees until after we were sworn in that second Monday in January. We left the House that day and went to a large meeting room we rented at the Marriott Marquis. Nobody knew it, away from the crowd in the basement, set up flip charts, and we stayed in there at about 3 in the morning hammering out the chairmanships and committees.
So you reassigned everything. We talked off camera that you and Tom Price, you saw these new rooms that unbeknownst to the minority party. Was there a policy program locked and loaded, ready to go? Because the state Senate had gone in 2002 with Jack Hill and Rooney Bowen and those fellows. The governor's there, Republican. Were there very clear priorities that Republicans were going to finally try to enact now that government was?
We had a list of probably 6 or 8. But at the very top of that list, besides procedural reforms,
Sure.
was tort reform. Tort reform had been bottled up in the House for years. I don't know if you remember, but Terry Coleman, Speaker Coleman, fired Chairman Tom Bordeaux from Savannah as chairman of the Judiciary Committee late in his last session in 2004 because he wouldn't let a tort reform bill out, and made Mary Margaret Oliver chair for the balance of the session. There was pent-up demand to vote on tort reform in the House. So we knew that was going to be one. Some voting reforms, voter ID, we passed. Obviously, the Woman's Right to Know bill. We had passed partial birth abortion when I was chairman of the Christian Coalition that Zell Miller signed at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we passed it that afternoon when he was governor. But the Woman's Right to Know bill, informed consent, sonogram. So we had a lot of pent-up energy for life bills, so we did all those things. We rearranged the House. We put in the key card vote. There had never been electronic voting. With a key card, you can vote as soon as the clerk unlocks the machine, and you can just start pushing buttons. Well, to this day, unless your card, that's a little credit card's in your machine, that machine can't be voted. Now, you can put it in there and leave it, somebody can vote it, but we actually helped defeat a guy up in North Georgia because he put his book on the vote and left early one day because all was left was privilege resolutions, but one of them was the Cynthia McKinney Highway. And this particular Democrat was in a very, very conservative mountain district. And to say that we used that in that election would be an understatement because he voted yes. But we did key card. We changed the appropriations process by appointing subcommittee chairman and dividing the budget up so we had more eyes, more scrutiny, and what we think was a greater efficiency in managing a growing state budget. And it came into handy as we were going into a recession
Right.
to have that. Of course, the Senate had formed the Senate Budget Office when they took the Senate, so we were working with the House Budget Office. Special projects, what was called local assistant projects. We ultimately did away with those, but we put a process in where you had to apply for those, fill out a form, have your senator co-sponsor it, describe the need, what was going, there was used to be a lot of money in the budget for band uniforms and ball field lights and things just to buy votes. And we always railed against that, and so we ended that process, and it doesn't exist again today.
Sandy Springs.
Here was one.
Tell me about this. This is a hot button topic that's it really talk about pent up emotion.
Yep.
Sandy Springs. I think when doing my research for a project, you're talking 1952, 1953, up through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and Sandy Springs Incorporation never comes through. Why in 2004, 2005? Why is Sandy Springs able to incorporate after that?
Well, first we picked up some seats in North Fulton County that were drawn. Joe Wilkinson, Wendell Willard, seats like that we had never been able to have. Because of the population, there were a lot of new seats in these heavily populated Republican suburban districts. So we were able to get these. All of a sudden now we've got a sizable Republican delegation in Fulton County, particularly North Fulton. And they've been trying for years and years and years and years, and it was time. That was a tough vote and a tough bill because it sort of broke precedent with the way you did things.
Sure.
But we knew we had to do it. It was the right thing to do, as it's turned out. I'm a resident of Sandy Springs now, but and my friend Rusty Paul's the mayor. But it was the right thing to do. It certainly has opened the door now to all the incorporations that go all the way up. I mean, Dunwoody, Johns Creek, Alfred, all the Milton. I mean, all those things now came as a result of that. The city of South Fulton and other incorporations in Democratic areas allowing local rule, basically.
Stonecrest, I believe, is one.
Yeah, it was interesting when the special master was appointed to draw the legislative maps. He's from the north. Primarily in the north, cities trump counties.
Oh yes, township model. I'm from Illinois.
Right. Well, in Georgia in particular, counties trump cities big time.
Every time.
So when he drew the map, what was interesting is he didn't mind carving up counties, which was, when we first looked at the maps, this is stupid. But he kept cities, he tried to keep cities whole, unless it was a major metropolitan area like Atlanta or
Right.
But he would always keep cities whole. Previously in Glenn County, Brunswick was sort of divided up in the county between me and, at that time, Robert Tillman. But the special master didn't want to do that. And so my district in Glenn County incorporated all of it. And it went to, I actually had, a lot of people don't know this, but I had a pretty high black voting age population in my district the last few years I served down there because I had all of Brunswick. And it was not, in a statewide or a national election, my district was about a 55% Republican district. It wasn't, 60 or 70. But looking at that, the county sort of held court over the cities. And I think you've seen that change a little bit. It's still that way, but there are so many cities now. And in Fulton County, there are more people that live in incorporated areas.
Right.
I don't know. Is anybody left in unincorporated?
There's
a few.
Not north of the river.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's anything that's unincorporated north of the river.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it started a trend. But that was, you would add that to our list of things we wanted to do.
So tell me about, if you want, the process of sort of maturing in governance, majority. You talked about you served in the minority. Nobody's passing any bills. The minority, you can just be against whatever.
Vote no and go home.
Right, right. How did that change sort of your perspective on you're very conservative. You've grown up in the activist activist wing of the party, so to speak. How did governing change you, if at all?
Oh, it changed me greatly, because all of a sudden the responsibility of governing hits you when you just begin assembling your caucus and the House membership in a very large chamber. I think our biggest concern was the budget. We had never no one in our caucus had actively participated in a final budget. You had Republican members on appropriations, but
right.
They were not in Green Door Committee, and they certainly were not in the room when the final decisions were made. And there were a lot of people, not only in the State House, but around the state, that said these guys are never going to be able to do this. 130 years is a long time.
That is a very long time.
And nobody alive, and certainly nobody alive at the state capitol as a Democrat had ever been in the minority, and nobody alive in the Republican Party had ever been in the majority. So it was a huge challenge. But Burkhalter, Richardson, and myself, it was an interesting coalition of leadership in that none of us had enough pull in the caucus to be one guy versus everybody else. But each of us had our constituencies within the caucus, and that allowed us to govern early on.
Were those geographic constituencies? Because you're talking a West Georgia guy, a Metro Atlanta, Johns Creek, and then...
Not necessarily. I mean, there was a little of that, but no, it was just personalities and friendships. And let me go back. When we're running, and we're getting close to November in 2004, and we know we're close, Burkhalter and Richardson were running against each other openly for Speaker, out campaigning. And so here we are trying to win the doggone thing, and they're out there. And I will tell you my concern, and I know Governor Perdue shared this because he and I talked about it. If we were able to pull this thing off, the last thing we needed, it was going to be difficult enough to govern, was a fractured caucus or someone cutting deals with Democrats so they could be this or that. Then our ability to govern with an extremely narrow margin of votes, we could fail, and we could fail quickly. I mean, just because we won
and prove everybody right.
And prove everybody right, and all of a sudden there were still all these rural Democrats there. Only 3 or 4 switched. There were still a large number. Bob Lane in Statesboro, and Richard Royal, and Mickey Chanel, and Butch Parrish, and Johnny Floyd. These were bright, seasoned
DuBose Porter was still there. He
stayed. Yeah, as
the
a
whole
Democrat.
Time? Yeah.
I don't think there was any chance of DuBose.
No.
But, I mean, these guys knew what they were doing and had governed. And if we had gone in that first day, split and fighting over who was going to be Speaker, I don't know where we'd be today. And given the stresses, particular of the recession that hit, and the stress that put on the budget, and then the politics that are inherent in the budget, which you make more policy in a budget than you do in all the other bills you pass during session. It couldn't happen. So, it's not just me, but I organized a dinner for Glenn and Mark one night on a Sunday night in Atlanta, a couple of weeks out. I said, guys, we got to put this thing together. I'll take any role or no role, but you two guys got to work it out. There's plenty of love to go around. The Speaker Pro Tem job to that point had been sort of an honorary, not a lot of juice. So we immediately took that position and said, Mark, because we thought Glenn had the votes, and he did. But it wasn't just a matter of Glenn winning the vote. It was a matter of not having a fractured caucus who would then go with the rural Democrats and kill bills or circumvent everything. So to Mark's credit, Burkhalter's credit, he understood that as well as anybody. And we put together this governing coalition. And, Glenn would be speaker, Mark would be pro tem, and I'd be majority leader. And so the first caucus meeting, there was unanimous votes. I think the only contested race was for whip.
Was that Edward Lindsay?
No, that was Barry Fleming.
Oh, Fleming.
Barry Fleming ran against, I think James Mills is who he ran against, and Fleming won. And I'm glad Barry was my first whip, and he just still a great legislator, great friend, and a bright guy. So, we didn't have real contested caucus races. Mark came out and said, I'm going to endorse Glenn. We're all going to work together. So that last couple of weeks, we had a unified team pushing those races,
right?
Not calling up all these candidates and saying, now who are you going to support? And they're trying to get elected. But it was new territory. There was no book on how to do this.
No.
We were making it up as we went along, but from the aftermath of that dinner and the ability to do that, it made everything a whole lot easier.
How much cooperation did you have on the Senate side with your Senate colleagues?
Some. No, we actually worked pretty well. Eric Johnson was over there at the time, and Tommy Williams, and we got along pretty good. There were some moments that were tough. Speaker Richardson and Lieutenant Governor Cagle had their moments, and so that made it difficult. But it was growing pains. Most of that driven by personality more than policy differences.
Do you think that's still, this is jumping ahead a little bit, because there's still those, you can look at the legislation and pretty much predict what's going to come out of the House, what's going to come out of the Senate, and why. Is it still that case that it's a personality difference or a gulf in that, or is it ideological? What is it?
No,
what do you think?
Since Republicans took the House and Senate and the governor's office, I think the chambers have sort of gone back and forth. You could argue which chamber is more conservative than the other. I'm not going to say who is, but you've seen real conservative legislation come out of here or out of here, and it's changed. There's always that House-Senate competition. I wished I had a better answer for you because I don't understand it. To a certain degree, I wished it didn't exist. I think you could get more things done. But it's there, and it's that same way in most states. I've worked in some state legislators,
sure, and
legislatures, and it's there.
It was that way in the 1980s with
with Speaker Murphy.
Zell Miller and Speaker Murphy.
Goodness. They were, And
it was probably worse. The acrimony, at least the public acrimony, was at least probably worse in the 80s with Governor Miller.
In the past few years, it has softened a little because Speaker Ralston and Lieutenant Governor Cagle have personalities that are more compatible, and so I think from that standpoint, and certainly Governor Deal coming in, there's been, they've all seemed to get along and work pretty well together. That doesn't mean they don't have differences of opinion.
Sure.
And you always get late in the session and you got this bill or that bill. Well, that's got this guy's name on it, and that's got this guy's. We'll hold that to this. I don't know how you do away with that. We worked hard to do away with some of that, but I think the nature of the beast is that's just part of the process. It's the process in every state, and except one where they don't have two chambers.
Right. But good old Nebraska.
Yeah, but other than that, there's always that sort of tension. And I've always said, I heard Newt Gingrich say one time that it should be hard to pass a bill. And that was part of the genius of the Founding Fathers. It shouldn't be easy to pass bills even when one party controls. And that's a fair statement because we get enough bad legislation, we don't want to make it any easier. So I think to a certain degree, some of that is healthy because you end up sometime with a better product, but some of it could be done away with, and I think would benefit particularly the Republican Party as they sit today.
You said that you were originally going to serve 8 years. You wanted to serve 8 years, 4 terms.
Right.
You end up serving through 2010.
10.
Why did you decide to step away at that point?
I had had all the fun I wanted. I was very fortunate to be there in a historical transition of government. I was there when the first Republican governor, the first Republican House. We saw our majorities increased, close to constitutional majorities, and major legislative changes. We did some really good things. I enjoyed serving with Governor Perdue, who will never get the credit he deserves for being the first Republican governor in a recession and keeping that budget balanced and maintaining a AAA bond rating. That was no easy task. But I was tired. I never saw this as a long-term career. I sincerely thought 4 terms is enough for anybody. And I'd made up my mind 8 was going to be it, but a lot of events had happened, and I thought, one more term won't kill me. But I knew when I ran in 2008 that was it for me. I hadn't told anybody, but I knew it was. And I confided in Speaker Ralston once he became Speaker in late 2009 that I was not going to run again. And he and I were the only ones that knew that for a while. But I felt like I'd done what I came to do. I don't want to be one of those guys that stays up there too long and just shuffling around the Capitol and, I forgot why you got there. We were able to do some pretty heady things legislatively, and I enjoyed that time. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I enjoy what I'm doing now because it keeps me involved, but I don't have caucus politics, and I don't have to raise money, and I don't have to campaign. So it worked out perfect. I don't have any regrets about that decision at all.
How has the Republican Party changed since you first got involved?
Wow. It's definitely different because it has a much broader base. Georgia being a sort of a unique state population with a huge metropolitan center with metropolitan Atlanta, and then the rural Georgia. Watching rural Georgia now is pretty much all Republican.
Sure.
With the metro sort of split. I think the party has grown and matured. It's gone through a lot of the little battles. They still go through it. But I think it is definitely a party that is governed, that is stable in its leadership, sort of knows what it's going to do in the General Assembly every year. And there are always going to be the fights. We need to be more conservative. No, we're too conservative. Yeah, that's just there. I mean, that's never going to go away.
Sure.
But I think the party as itself now is deeply established. The courthouses, the county commissions, the sheriff's offices, all these statewide offices that are Republican now for many terms, everything, agriculture, education, all that has changed. So the Republican footprint, and more importantly, the Republican imprint on policy is there and has become very much established.
What do you think that the greatest danger to the Republican majority status is in Georgia? We talked about factionalism and how that's there. What is the biggest danger?
Demographics. So it's the only thing that will affect the Republican majority for a long time, but not forever, obviously.
Sure.
The growth of minority populations, which are historically heavy Democratic voting, is growing at a rate far faster than the other population. And so eventually you're not going to be able to deny that's happening. You've already seen a little bit of an impact. I mean, look, Georgia is basically a 4 to 5 point Republican state in a statewide election. I mean, if you win a statewide election by more than 5 points, it's a significant win. 10 points, it's a landslide. So with this coming election this year, especially in the governor's race, I think Republicans will win, And I think, it'll probably be somewhere in the 4 to 5 points. But you're going to have to watch these changes because there's not a lot you can do about that. The Democrats will win a statewide race before they win a chamber, same as we did. The chamber will take a while. So you could have a Democratic governor or a Democratic, labor commissioner, or state long before you have a Democratic House or Senate. In all likelihood, Republicans are going to draw the next legislative maps in 2020 and 21 with a Republican governor and a Republican majority in both. Now, what those majorities look like. But when they go to draw those maps, it's not going to be as easy as it's been.
Look back to 2016, the presidential election. Hillary Clinton carried Cobb County, Gwinnett, Henry County. Sort of, although the beginning of our discussion, we talked about the epicenter of growing Republicanism were those suburbs in Gwinnett and DeKalb and Cobb County. What do you think accounts for that Democrats have made pretty considerable inroads into historically Republican
the movement
areas.
Of the minority population from in-town to suburbs. You look at Gwinnett County, it is a majority minority county.
Right.
The school system has been for several years. But now, as a result of that, Cherokee, Bartow, you go to these counties.
Sort of the northern exurbs.
Yeah, you go out to the exurbs now, and they're all solidly Republican. Mm-hmm. So you get outside. But this big bubble in Atlanta has a huge number. And this is why in a statewide race, you look for certain areas to win because, you can win 5 counties in South Georgia and 2 precincts in North Fulton County, and you got more votes and actual voters turn out than you do down there. So you can say, well, I won 4 or 5 counties down in South Georgia. Well, that's great. But on a popular vote contest,
the county unit system
system's not there anymore. There are more people voting in Roswell and Johns Creek than there are down there. So that's the dynamic that you can't change. And it will change Georgia politics. And I don't think it's going to happen this year. May not happen in 20, but I think by 2022, you'll have a very, very competitive statewide election.
What do you? And this is a real thorn bush of a question, but what do you think the long-term impact of Donald Trump is going to be on the Republican brand? In Washington, but more particularly here in Georgia.
Well, he has changed the Republican Party and the brand significantly, and with some Republicans going kicking and screaming, into the night. But I see it as someone who was a loyal Reagan guy. I see so many similarities in the policies, not in the style and personality.
Sure, right.
But I remember, listen, in '76, I've never heard as many things negative said about a guy than Ronald Reagan by Republicans. He was a warmonger. He was going to put us in a nuclear war. He was incompetent. He didn't know what he was doing. He was an actor. He was not qualified to be, president. And even when he won the nomination in '80, even when he won the election in 1980, there were a lot of people that there were a lot of similarities. It was not as ginned up as we see now. I've never seen anything like what we see now in terms of the hostility. But the outsider and the politics as usual as we've known for the last 34 years are pretty much over now. As a Republican, if you run and get elected, there's going to be certain expectations to do certain things. And Trump, while conservative, what would be a term, is more a populist.
Sure.
And I think Governor Perdue, to a certain degree, had a populist streak in him. And that's a little different than just a pure conservative model. there's a role for government in certain areas. It's limited, but there's a definite role where pure conservative may see government as national defense and
right, sort of the libertarian
right.
model.
But what Donald Trump did in the last election was bring people into the Republican Party that had either not been in the Republican Party or not voting, or had been voting Democrat, just like Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan brought Southern lifelong Democrats into the Republican Party. Donald Trump brought Northern and Midwestern blue-collar, many times unionized labor Democrats into the Republican Party for the first time, in some cases ever. Now, that's a coalition that's new to this party, and you're seeing the tension in D.C. now. But it's not a Chamber of Commerce party anymore. It's changed.
Right.
I heard the president this morning in Brussels challenge, Germany, you're buying your oil from Russia, and yet we're putting all this money in to protect Europe from Russia, and you're sending them billions of dollars a year that they can spend on defense. And his word was, please explain that to me. Well, that's not a traditional Republican position. And it's the first time a president has basically said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Tariffs, you look at that. That's a...
You have to go back to...
Yeah, I mean, you go way back.
Harding and Hoover.
But he's taken a different tact on that than them, but it's not a typical Republican Chamber of Commerce position. So he's changed the dynamic, and he did it quite successfully, because I think over time, and this happens everywhere, over time, the longer a party is in power, and the longer the people in that party are in power, there just becomes a moderation to the process. Sometimes the process takes over the policy. And, Trump came in and just threw all the rules out, kicked the doors down. And I think to a certain degree, he didn't get the credit for it, but he's invigorated some Republicans up there who'd been a little dormant for years. And you see them all of a sudden with an energy level and a new passion for the fight and for policy that you hadn't seen in a while. And you look at our gubernatorial runoff right now, I mean, and there's not an ad by either candidate that doesn't say, I'm a Trump guy. You look at what happened in South Carolina. You look at all these ads all over the country in these statewide races, and they want Trump in there for them. Mm-hmm. And even a year or so ago, right after he got elected, the conventional wisdom was, you don't say you're for Trump. Well, now you can't get out there fast enough to say you're for him, because he's established a brand, he's established his style, which is different than mine and most, but the results, I think, are what people are looking at.
Do you think that you've talked about the coalition of maybe rural Georgia, South Georgia? Is there any concern that with the sixth district special election, where there's about a 13-point swing to the Democrats, that we've seen in state legislative races here in Athens or Ginger and over in East Cobb, Buckhead, that while Republicans may have found new voters or voters who had disengaged from the process, that those suburban core areas that had been strongly Republican, there might be shifts the other way, sort of a give and take, I guess, in terms of voters.
Well, the 6 is interesting. I live in the 6, but it's it's a more establishment, moderate district. Mm-hmm. So there's that to deal with. However, the special election in the 6, special elections are special elections, and they have a dynamic all their own. And we've seen over the years, whether there's Donald Trump or not Donald Trump in special elections, some really goofy results. I think let's wait and see this year during a normal statewide election campaign what happens in the 6th.
Sure.
I know we're talking a few months out, but I think you'll see a little bit wider spread up there. Donald Trump's still president, but I think you'll see Congresswoman Handel win by a much wider margin than the one she ran in, because Republicans just didn't go back and vote in special elections. And, it was right after the election. There just wasn't the energy.
Sort of enthusiasm gap between the two.
There wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. You couldn't get people fired up about it. I've got a son that lives up in Roswell. You got to go, and so I think you'll see a little different dynamic, but still, Republicans, particularly in a state that's trending against them numerically, you better turn out and vote. If you do, you're going to win because you still have more numbers. But if you're complacent, which is one of the real dangers of being in the majority for a while, and say, well, they're going to win anyway, what's the difference? You can wake up like the Democrats did in the House in 2004, and what happened? And what's interesting is, if you look at the Democratic House leadership, from Speaker Coleman down, go back and look at campaign reports of some of the top 4 or 5. If you added up what they still had in their account, it's close to $2 million. Now, could they have changed the outcome on 2, 3, 4 of those races that we won by 100 votes, 50 votes? Yes. But the truth is, they didn't believe. The morning after that race, we had breakfast at the governor's mansion. We came back to the Capitol. Speaker Coleman called, and Glenn and I went over and met with him. And you walked in the speaker's office, and literally, I've been in funeral homes that had more energy in life. People were crying. They were completely stunned. And Terry told Glenn and I, we said, didn't you see this coming? He said, no. All of our people, everybody around us, your consultants, said there was no way. Was it going to be much closer? Oh, yeah. But we figured we were going to win 95, 96 seats. And we were worried about you guys, trying to pick off some of our guys. And, we were talking about the same things y'all were, governing going forward with a slim majority. But they said they never saw it coming. I don't want that to happen to us in Georgia, because I think it can happen, and it can happen this election cycle if Republicans don't turn out.
Well, I think that's a great place that we've sort of come full circle in this conversation. Is there anything else you want to record for posterity while you're here?
No, there were a lot of people that led to the Republican majority that don't get a lot of credit or notoriety, but a lot of the men and women that served down at the state capitol in the minority for years and years and years and years that never passed a bill, never were chairman, never had a leadership position, but helped build. And you think of people like Max Davis who passed away, and others that really worked hard, and guys like Fred Cooper and Alec Point, all those guys that helped raise money for years and years for the Republicans in the minority. And then to the guys that switched parties and came over and helped us, Sonny Perdue, switching as a senator and coming over. Jack Hill, who still chairs appropriations in the Senate, is a great friend, has been a tremendous chairman of appropriations in the Senate, and many others. I think, the election of November of 2004, all the lights were on us in the House, but there were a lot of people before then, Lynn Westmoreland included, that got that caucus ready to lead. And had Lynn not been minority leader of our caucus at the time, I don't think we'd have won the majority when we did. He deserves a lot of credit.
Well, Leader Keene, thank you very much for taking this time this afternoon to talk history, politics with me here at the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.